In this video, we're going to discuss how to customize the layout of a form in MemberJunction Explorer. The MemberJunction code generator tool will create a default form layout for every entity that it detects and generates metadata for. As an example, this particular form layout is actually for the entities entity. So this is a core element of the MemberJunction framework. Entities contain lots of information. So let's take a look at what was generated for us automatically. You can see here that in this generated form, at the very top, we have a kendo splitter. And inside this kendo splitter, we have something called a top area. This is essentially an area of the form that represents a section of fields that were designated as being part of the top area in the entity field's metadata. So in each entity field, you can specify a section where the field should show up. That metadata, in turn, is used by the code generator tool to group those fields and put them into the right place. You'll see the same pattern repeat several times throughout this tab control. So in the next part of the splitter, there's a top area and a bottom area of the splitter. You have something called an MJ tab strip, which is a MemberJunction component for tabs. And you'll notice that there's a details tab, and you can see another form section for the entity's entity in the section details. The same thing for audit, and you'll notice the same thing for API, DB, and UI. So each of these represents a separate template. We're going to go ahead and take a look at those templates now. If we look in our generated files, we can see under the entity, we have the file I'm looking at right now, which is the md.formComponent.html, and then you can see all the different sections. If we take a look at the top, you'll see a very simple Angular template. You can see our div, and then within there is something called MJ form fields, which are MemberJunction components, which automatically configure a label and a component for viewing or editing a piece of data, depending on the mode of the form. The forms can either be in read mode or edit mode, and you can see that information is being passed along through Angular binding through the edit mode property of each MJ form field. This is a very simple layout. It simply stacks the fields vertically, name, description, base table, etc. Each entity has generated forms and generated sections like this. You'll also notice the details section. If I take a look at the DB section, these are all sections that were created based upon the category field within the entity field's metadata. And that is how you tell the code generator where you want these fields to end up on a form. Now, if we go back and look at the entity form component, this is the actual overall form for an entity record. So if you open up an entity to display in the user interface in MemberJunction Explorer, this is the component that gets run. Now, if you want to modify the generated code, you essentially copy the piece of it that you're interested in making changes to. You do not make changes directly to the component in question because they will be overwritten the next time the code generator runs. So let's take an example and take a look at it. Over here, this is actually part of the core framework code. There is a package called core entity forms, and you can see under the live, you have custom and generated. Generated is what we've been looking at. Now, under custom forms, we have entity form component.html, and you'll see this is very similar looking. We have overwritten the overall layout. We haven't modified the sections. We've essentially moved things around. So you'll notice the top area is still what it was. But notice here now, we have two tabs that have been moved up in the order of tabs. We have the list of fields, which is not a form section, but rather something called the user view grid component, which is a MemberJunction component that displays a view wherever you drop it in. And you can see that there's another one for permissions, because these are two of the very commonly needed pieces of information associated with every single one of the entities you ever view in the system. So they've been moved up, and then the rest of it is exactly the same: details, audit, API, etc. And you'll see there's more tabs here with more relationship data. And so we've overridden the default layout. And what we've done is over here on this entities form component.ts, this is the TypeScript code, you'll notice that we have created ourselves a component here that is using something called register class, which I'll hover over for a minute. Register class is a TypeScript decorator that allows you to specify the name of a base class, define the new class, of course, which is what you'll find the decorator to, a key value, and a priority. So what we're doing here is registering this class at the priority of 1, which means that it'll be invoked before the generated class. If we go back and look at the generated class over here, the generated class here is very simple. It doesn't have a priority. And the reason that's important is because over here where we have our custom class, we've given it a priority of 1, which means that it'll take place. You do not need to modify the generated code at all. Register class essentially lets the MemberJunction global package know about your new class. And once you've done that, the beauty is that MemberJunction does everything dynamically using the class factory, which is tied to the register class decorator, and will automatically invoke your new form. Now that you know that you can use Angular to do literally anything you want. The record component is basically built into here, so you see that this is referred to here. This is a instance of the entity, which is a subclass of base entity, and we're binding it to various things here. You can do anything that you can do with Angular with these components to your heart's content with this custom form layout mechanism.